Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Augustus Hinton, and this is what my face looks like. And today I will be teaching you about keyframe influences, easy ease, and the graph editor and how those things all intertwine. I have some different examples that will show you what these things are, what they do, how to adjust them, and the best situation to use the different weights and influences. If you're so inclined, please like this video, comment below, subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much, and let's get started. So what am I talking about when I say keyframe influence? This has to do with easy easing on your keyframes in After Effects. So I have an example here of some position keyframes, and we'll just take a quick look at some of these different ones. Why don't I just quickly select these, hit U to hide the keyframes, select this guy, or he can stay. These diamond keyframes, of course, are not easy eased. They are just regular. We've just said we want you to be at this position at this time, and that's it. And these ones that have the sort of hourglass shape, those have been easy eased, which is of course smoothing out your keyframes, which you can do by right-clicking and doing Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease, and you can control if that's just coming into the keyframe or going out, or for Easy Ease Out, Easy Ease Regular, that's on both sides, which you can do by right-clicking, selecting these, doing the shortcuts. What I highly recommend, this is not a paid ad, purchasing Motion V2, made by Mount Mograph, if you've ever followed his tutorials. I think it's like 50 bucks, and if that seems like a lot of money, let me tell you, I use it like every second of every day, because you can just select a keyframe and just say, I want it to be this, or I want it to be that, You have so much control, it's so easy, there's no hotkeys. It's so much better, and there's a ton of other tools that I use often as well. So that's my plug. Would recommend if you animate in any large capacity. Yeah, would recommend. Anyways, when there is zero influence, like there is with this top row, so let's zoom in a little bit, like this. Zero influence between the keyframes. It's a totally constant rate. You can see even these little frame dots. They're pretty small. They're evenly spaced out, exactly, because it's a totally constant speed. Let me even get rid of this guy. Totally constant speed as we move back and forth. Easy peasy, right? But also like a little potentially boring depending on what you're trying to communicate. If it's like a robot or something that's very stiff movement, maybe that's perfect. But even then, there's probably some easy ease. And as we start to add easy ease, you can see with this 20%, as we go left to right, it's going to approach this right keyframe much more quickly, as you can see here. Not much more quickly because it's only 20% influence. And if we go the opposite direction, it's going to hang around this keyframe a little longer than the zero, because he just started out with his constant speed. This guy hangs around here for a bit longer before it then more quickly gains speed to end up at this left keyframe. And so what does influence mean? It's kind of like the weight on that keyframe. And what I mean by that, it might be easier to visualize if we look at the graph editor. So I just clicked on this little graph editor button after selecting a keyframe. So that's going to bring up the position of the position graph of our square here. I'm going to hold Alt or Option and then mouse wheel up to make this, to zoom into this a little bit. And I am working in the speed graph. So if we click this little button and you hover over it, it says choose graph type and options. I'm in edit speed graph. You can do value. For some reason with my brain, it just is a little easier with speed. And maybe it'll be easier with yours after this tutorial. So as you can see, technically the regular keyframes aren't zero influence, because zero would look like this. So it is like 10%, but it's cool. It's cool. And this 20% here, if we click this little handle on this keyframe, because this is the keyframe that has the 20% influence, 20% easy ease, right? If we click this little handle and just start to move it, it'll show the amount right there, the speed and the influence. The influence is at 20%. And that means it's 20%, this little handle is 20% of the distance between this keyframe and the midpoint between the two. So 100% is going to be all the way to the midpoint. I'll do Command Z. And then, 50% is going to be halfway, and, so on. So 20% is not real far, but it does mean that we're starting out faster, because the higher up on this graph, the speed graph, that we are, the faster we're moving, the higher the speed, right? And then it does ease a little bit because it kind of slopes down, slower speed into this final position. So let's look at a more dramatic version of this. I'm going to click out of my graph editor with this little button. Let's go down to the 100, baby. And I'm going to hit U to bring up my keyframes on this layer and click on this position keyframe. And even before I do that, if we just kind of click on the layer, you can see if you look at these little tiny dots that there's big spaces initially, which means it's going to be moving really quickly, and then they get really tight as we get closer to the final keyframe. I'll hit play. And so we can see as it goes left to right, it's really zoom in, still ending up at that last position at the same time as everything else, but it's approaching it much more quickly. There where you can see all those little keyframes that are really tightly packed closer to the right keyframe. And then as we watch it go right to left, I'll hit play here, you can see that it hangs around this keyframe a lot longer. So it takes a long time to gain that speed before zooming off to the left. And let's click on a keyframe, hit the graph editor button here. You can see the influence on these keyframes, if we click and kind of move our mouse, it's at 100%, which means it's 100% of the way to the midpoint between the keyframes. It's probably a little confusing. But you've kind of maxed out the weight you can have on it, because the keyframes have to share the weights between each other, right? And so that leads to a dramatic spike right here, right? And if this was truly 0, it would be, we'd start all the way up here. But I guess the default is like 10%, which I'm learning. Oh, it's not even 10%. It's more than. Which I'm learning here today with you. Look at us all learn together. But all to say, since this first keyframe has very little influence, very little weight on that motion, we're doing a really quick movement right in the beginning, and then very gradually, as you can see, our speed very gradually decreases, gradually approaching that end frame. So, what does that mean? When do I use, if I'm starting out at 0, when do I use 1 or 20 or 40% easy ease or influence? When do I use 60, 80, 100? Great question. It depends on what kind of motion you're trying to communicate. Kind of like I said, with this 0% or 0 influence with totally constant speed, that might be a more robotic sort of thing, or just like an automated kind of thing, depending again on what the content is that you're animating. I would say typically, even something like a robot moving, there's probably going to be a little bit of easy ease happening, so even like a 20% might look a little bit nicer. And there's very few things in nature that move completely like this, even as I do this example, there's going to be some easing as my hand slows down. So this will look a bit more automated, maybe a bit less natural. And what I like to do, let me just click on this layer here that I've labeled as out of frame. So pretend that this is off screen. Oh, did I move it? Oh my God. Pretend that this is off screen, and we're having an object or a word or whatever for your social post, your explainer video, what have you, fly off the screen. We're transitioning to something else, right? What I like to do typically is something closer to this bottom here with either 100% or 80%. I like to work in like the 75% influence. That's kind of my starting area, starting easy ease, because it allows you, as we go right to left, you're hanging around this position for a bit longer, right? So you give the viewer a little bit more time as we see, oh, it's starting to move. Let me actually do a little zoom in action here to focus in on this. It gives us a bit more time to see like, oh, something's happening. And then it hasn't moved too much and we can still see, oh, it's kind of by its position, and then it just zooms off. So you give the viewer a second to be like, oh, that's where my eye should be. And then you don't need much time after that to communicate that it's exiting. So we have maybe, you know, half the time the viewer recognizes something is happening, great. And then they don't need much to see like, okay, it went off screen. Versus, you know, kind of these ones up here, it can just be a little bit jarring because all of a sudden something is happening, and then while you're trying to figure out where to look, that action is also occurring. Versus down here, we get a hint that something's going to happen, we can look, and then the vast majority of that action occurs. So you kind of break up those two things that allow the viewer to process one thing and then look at another, versus two things happening at once. So that to me is kind of the function of how to use these effectively. That's one example of it at least. And then as we look at, what do we got here? This is another position example. Same idea as the first one, except now on this left side, we're kind of matching the influence. So instead of everything starting at 0, you know, we scale up as we do here. And if I just hit play, you can see this top one is the same. He's just doing a nice constant speed, and the greater we influence, the crazier the speed spike is going to be in the middle. So let's just look at like 20%. It is starting at, you know, 0 speed and then pretty quickly ramping up to its top speed here and slowing down just a little in between, or as it approaches, you know, either end. Which is, you know, it's nice. It's sort of a kind of like a constant motion, but adds just a little softness to the start and stop, and that adds some sort of natural feel and weight to the motion. Kind of like I was saying, almost anything is going to have a little bit of slowdown on, you know, its start and stop. And if we click on the bottom guy here, the 100, yeah, look at these crazy spikes. Both of these keyframes on either side, again, if we click, they have 100% influence, which means each of them want the object to hang around them for as long as possible. As you can see, it's a really slow start and a slow finish, which means almost all the distance has to happen like right in the middle. So it's doing a huge leap for these like 2 to 3 keyframes right in the middle, and very little motion on either side. And you can see, since all of these, even though they're all different easy ease amounts, influence amounts, since they're equal on either side, if we go right in the middle, they're all going to reach that midpoint at the same time, even though, of course, either side of that looks very different for each of these. Again, you know, you're starting and ending at the same time for every single one of these. And, you know, in terms of practical use of this is just really nice. Maybe you're just moving something on the screen from one point to another, and, you know, you want it to look kind of natural, so maybe like, I don't know, 40, 60, 80, somewhere in that range would look kind of nice. Just to have something move across, moving over for some more information to come on in the screen, whatever that is. Because, you know, this is looking a little crazy, but there's a time and a place for everything. Okay, so that kind of covers position. I hope that's a good kind of base understanding of what influence is. And I wanted to also show you that this idea applies to any keyframe that you can apply in After Effects. And you know, you can keyframe just about anything with effects, scale, rotation, position, and, you know, anything. So for scale, it's the exact same idea applies. We're starting at our base scale here, all these little white squares, 0% influence on this bottom starting scale, and we range from 0 to 50 to 100 on the top. So I'll hit play, and we'll just watch that for a quick second. Exact same idea. They're all gonna get here at the same time, but 100 is gonna approach much more quickly than the 50, and like a lot more quickly than the 0, 0. The 0, 0 is going to be a constant rate of growth. 50 will have a nice little softness to it, and 100 is going to jump way up. And it's the same idea, shrinking down. They're going to hang around these keyframes a lot longer and quickly zoom into their ending keyframe, which has no influence. And a practical application of kind of these varying degrees, maybe you are transitioning an icon of money into a donut because you bought a donut with money, so you convert the money into donut, whatever. Oftentimes I'll have something shrink down and then right in its place something pops up to replace it, like it kind of transformed into that thing. And so I typically like to do a really high easy ease on, so kind of like this 100 here, on something like that, because it, again, you start to see some movement, so that cues the viewer in, hey, you gotta look over here, which you could also do with some like anticipation where it gets a little bigger and then shrinks, clutch. But for this example, you start to see some movement, it cues the viewer to look right there, and then you can quickly communicate this is gonna shrink down. Because that idea is not difficult, you just have to let them see it. So it'll shrink down, and then typically what I like to do is the same thing to have something appear. We'll do like this kind of 0 to 100, quickly appears, and then slowly reaches that final scale. And this is kind of the same idea, assuming it's the same, you're looking in that same spot. You can really quickly show that this is growing, and then even if the viewer wasn't looking at it, they saw something happened, and this really slow approach to the final scale allows them to understand, oh, this grew, scaled up really quickly, this popped onto screen. And so these frames here, with its finishing up its motion, allow them to understand that. So let's take a quick look at the same idea with scale, except just like before, we now have this influence on either side of the starting and ending scale. So as we hit play, we can see the same idea, it's just exaggerated a bit more because we have influence on either side, where 0 is constant still, 50 is hugging this keyframe and that keyframe a bit more closely, so kind of a slower start, some speed in the middle, and then a soft end, and then a very dramatic scale up and down with the 100 here. And so, again, whatever you're communicating is going to require a different sort of influence and different feel. And so I can, the 50 I think looks really nice, especially if you're just kind of increasing or decreasing the size of an object but not making it disappear. Like a balloon inflating or something, or this thing grew to be big, who knows? Because it's a soft start and a soft finish, and this is a bit dramatic, like that's crazy. And crazy works in a lot of situations, but I would say most are probably gonna have this nice, soft, fluid situation here. I think that looks nice. So we'll take a look at just kidding, we'll take a look at the second to last example of these influences, rotation, because like I said, this works on anything. So these look like a speedometer on a car, and I just wanted to show how influence affects rotation as well. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but as you can see, it once again is hugging its sort of ending rotation, hugging the keyframe that has the most influence, which in this case is 100, and then slowly gaining speed and quickly approaching this, and vice versa. Quickly has a lot of speed in the beginning, and then slowly eases into that final rotation. And the 0 again has constant, and whatever you're trying to communicate, these are all going to have different uses, and you'll have to determine what best communicates the motion that you're trying to describe when you're animating. So we'll take a look at the same idea again, but with equal easy easing on either side. 0 will be constant again, 50 will have a little speed spike in the middle, 100 will have a big speed spike in the middle, and it's really soft and gentle here with this 50, that looks really pleasing, and this is again more dramatic, and maybe something between these two might be a car revving up its engine, going from 0 to 60 in 3.5, and starting out slow, getting a lot of speed in the middle, but then kind of peaking as you plateau and your car can't go any faster. So who knows? Again, you'll have to determine what the best influence in easy ease is to communicate what you're trying to animate. So that's a quick example there. The last thing I'll talk about is a number count up. if you animate professionally in any capacity, you've probably been asked to do a number counter, and it's not that hard, but it is deceivingly difficult because you think it'd be like 3 clicks, and it's not. There is tutorials. Just type in number counter timer tutorial on YouTube. You'll find one. I'm just using some code that I had to look up because I always forget how to do it. But anyways, these are just counting from 0 to 10, and you can see the amount of influence on either side. Again, here for these, all starting at 0. The 0 is going to be constant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. We understand. And you'll see, I'll just go to 0 to 100. Very quickly, zooms up towards 10, and then on the way back down, hangs around 10 a lot longer, and then all of a sudden drops. And then we'll quickly look at the same idea, except with equal influences on either side for these keyframes. And the reason I wanted to show this is because it's just a great idea, again, of how just the easy easing and having a lot of control and specificity over your keyframes can communicate different ideas. So I feel like I've been asked many times to do, we're counting years, or we're counting, doing data of any kind where, oh yeah, in 2 years there was an increase of 500 cases of people being really happy. And so we're counting from 0 to 500 really quickly, and you're not going to spend like 3 seconds counting up, because that's like actually a long time. You want to communicate the idea pretty quickly, but you have 500 numbers to get through. That's a lot. And so that is when I think, this 100 here, it's a bit dramatic. That's kind of crazy. Maybe 50 or something between these would be nice. But you want to communicate, we're starting at 0 and we're getting to 10. And the stuff in between is like not that important. Sorry, all you numbers, but it's just not. We're not spending a lot of time on the in-between. We're spending most of our time on the start and the end point. And that is a very effective communication of this number increase, because we're talking about the difference happening. The difference is 10. The rest doesn't matter. So again, it's just a different way that the influence can really change how you communicate what you're talking about when you animate. And so I just wanted to give a few examples of how it's useful and how I use it. I think having a really strong understanding of the influences on your keyframes, the amount of easy ease, looking at the graph editor and understanding what it means, that really sets apart your animations and makes it look polished and professional when your motion is doing exactly what you meant it to and communicating the exact type of physics and weight that you intended. So I recommend playing around. I absolutely recommend, again, not a paid ad, but I do recommend getting Motion V2 or V3, it might be now. I use it just all the time, and it paid for itself about 5 years ago, so would recommend. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, please post them in the comments and I can try to answer them, or the awesome community can try to answer them for you. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.